Hello, Body and Messiah. Today we're going to start TBON, the Lesson 10, Part 2 of the Spiritual Gift. Part 1 was just an introduction, and today we're going to start Part 2, and we're going to cover 5 of the gifts. As you can see behind, we have Word of Wisdom, a Word of Knowledge, we have Teachers, Leadership, and Service. Now, I've said before, you're going to see that some of these gifts may run over into other gifts that God have a blessed and anointed people with. But throughout all and every spiritual gift from the Ruach of Elohim, this is going to be repetitive. You also have to rely on faith and prayer. Okay? This is going to be repetitive throughout this entire lesson 10 of the spiritual gifts from the Ruach of Elohim. We have to rely on faith in the Most High God, and trust in Him in our all in all. Lean not to our own understanding. And when we're in a situation where we may not understand or need clarity regarding a gift that God has anointed us with, we have to go before Him in prayer to get clarity and understanding in the path that we should take or the route that we must go. So this is something that's going to follow throughout all the gifts, repetitively, faith and prayer. Now, we're going to cover this side before we go over here, because at the end, these scriptures are very vital to these spiritual gifts, okay? And what we're going to cover first is a word of wisdom. And I want you to make a note of Proverbs chapter 2, verse 7, where it says in the scriptures, He, the Most High God, Adonai, stores up sound wisdom for the upright. Now, people can have wisdom, but it does not mean it comes from a righteous source or there's righteous intentions behind it. But it says if it's a gift that comes from the Most High God, a word of wisdom that's to be imparted, that He stores it up specifically, sound wisdom. Make a note of that, sound wisdom for the upright. There are some people who are desire to attain wisdom. They may be very wise by man's standard when it comes to science, technology, how to build and make things. But that wisdom may not be sound wisdom. It may be wisdom that is used to manipulate for evil and negative purposes. As we can see, when you look at some of the apocryphal books and you see how the angels, the fallen angels, proceeded, they were imparting all kinds of wicked wisdom upon man in order to continue some wickedness. Okay? So, but the wisdom from the Most High God is sound wisdom. Now we can see an example of this when we look in Exodus chapter 18, verse 13 through 27, when Moshe's father-in-law, Jethro, or Reuel, the Midianite priest, imparted some wisdom on Moshe to let him know that he was running himself delirious trying to judge the population of Israel. When they came to him, everyone's coming to him for every issue, and he was the only one person. And Reuel, Jethro, was like, what are you doing? You're going to run yourself to death, basically, run yourself raggedy if you don't begin to gather up some known leaders amongst the nation of Israel that are honorable, upright, that do not take bribes, do not engage in any type of treachery. They have to be outstanding, righteous men. And he orchestrated and explained to Moshe how he was to organize. This group would be over 10 of these groups, and this leader would run this group, and so they would ultimately report back to Moshe if they came across an issue that they had to judge or make a call on that was something they felt they couldn't handle or something that they were uncomfortable with. And this right here helped Moshe probably to extend his life. If not, he would have ran himself ragged. Now, I'm giving you an example, and you can go and read on your own in 2 Samuel chapter 16, starting with verse 15. And you can read all the way through chapter 19 and verse 9. This is where you can see wisdom is not so sound coming towards Absalom. Absalom is a son of King David, and he rebelled against King David, but God had already prophesied to King David this would happen within his household because of what he did to Uriah the Hittite. And when he slept with Uriah's wife and then set him up for failure to be killed. And so God said, basically, this particular torment, which came from Absalom, came from within his own household. But specifically, when you look at 2 Samuel, starting with chapter 16 and verse 5, here's where you got different people giving advice. Like, focus on, I think his name is Ahithophel, is someone who gave Absalom some advice. And then he was trying to rely on his dad, one of his previous advisor or counselor named Hushai. Okay. And you'll see where it kind of went crooked because Absalom came to his end and his demise. Ahithophel had the audacity to advise Absalom in order to show the nation of Israel that he was against his dad to go and lay with his father's concubine or his women that he was who were committed to King David on the rooftop with the tent in front of, before all Israel. God is not going to allow this type of so-called wisdom. It's not sound. It was wrong. It was wrong before the Most High God. So make sure whatever wisdom that you count on or trust comes and fall in line with the word of the Most High God. You will also see later on when King David come to the realization that Absalom is dead, Joab is one of the military leaders that King David entrusted. And he had to basically get King David up out of mourning in order to pull Israel back together. That was sound wisdom that he gave him. It was harsh wisdom, but it was sound. So I just want you guys to see the different examples of sound wisdom and not so sound wisdom. Okay. And also, one good one you can always remember is when you look at Numbers chapter 22 through chapter 24 to 25, Balaam. Okay? He basically, if he sought the wisdom of the Most High God, he would have listened to the Most High God. But by the time you get to Numbers chapter 31, Balaam, who is a seer or a prophet, he basically had to be put to death because he didn't listen to sound wisdom. Okay? Now, we have a word of knowledge. A word of knowledge. Turn to Proverbs chapter 2, verse 10, where it says, "For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul." So it's a refreshing thing to have knowledge for people who desire it, who have that anointing for a word of knowledge. When it enters you, when wisdom enters you, your heart and knowledge becomes pleasant to your soul. Now, there are people who seek wisdom and seek knowledge, but they can be grieved by it if it's not for a righteous purpose. Okay, but it's supposed to be pleasant to your soul. There are moments when you will seek out a word of wisdom from the Most High God. And I'll give you an example of an experience that I had. I had a family member who was very worried, feeling that they had some issue going on internally with their body. And he felt like the issue was his throat. He felt it could be throat cancer or something that was detrimental to his health. And that people were ignoring it, and he knew something was wrong, something wasn't right. And so I began to go before the Lord in prayer and saying, God, give me an understanding what's going on. Tell me what's happening to him. Is there really an issue going on there? And the word of knowledge that came back to me when I was in the midst of praying and fasting is that, look, this particular family member, all his concerns will be resolved. I will heal him completely of what's ailing him. Now, I don't know if it was something that was life-threatening or not. Let me be clear. But this is the word of knowledge I got. God said, I'm going to heal him. But his issue is he does not believe that I love him enough in order to heal him. And I'm like, no, this family member loves you, God. He knows you. But that was the word of knowledge that was given to me. Felt that God does not love him enough, or he has to be something special or phenomenal in the eyes of God in order for him to receive the gift of being healed. And so I called that particular family member and shared with that family member exactly what the word of knowledge that came to me. And according to this, basically based on the response, I knew that word of knowledge that God had given me was true. And so, anyway, it ended up in a good situation because God gave me that knowledge because I asked for it. Okay. So, always there has to be faith because God is the source of these spiritual gifts, and prayer. You got to go before your heavenly Abba and ask him when you're not sure and confused about stuff. Always throughout. Okay, before we go over here to these gifts, we have to look at, if you turn to Mark chapter 20, verse 26, Matthew 20, verse 26, and then Mark chapter 10, verse 43. Look at what the scripture says, because a lot of people, when we're dealing with gifts and we deal with stuff like leadership and being a leader, this is very pivotal when it comes to being believers in Messiah, because he said there's a different standard for us being believers in Messiah. So in being a believer in Messiah, being a leader, because all the disciples were arguing like, I'm the greatest, I'm the best, and I'm the best of all the disciples, and basically like, I got all these gifts and I'm all this and all that. And so Messiah dropped this wisdom and knowledge on the disciples, and he said, not so with you. Okay, they're thinking that all this greatness and honor is about how much service they've done and what they did this way and how they have done more miraculous things from the Ruach of Elohim, remember. But he said, no, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Now, I knew that threw them a curveball, but we, as believers in Messiah, got to understand. To be called the greatest in the kingdom of the Most High God, we have to be servants. And that changes the dynamic of what people see as people being great and people, men and women of honor. Even in today's light, especially back then when you had kings and rulers and stuff. So we have to keep that in mind when we look at these spiritual gifts, especially when it comes to service and leadership. Now, I'm going to start with teachers here as being a spiritual gift. Not everyone has the patience to be a teacher. This is a gift from the Ruach of Elohim, and majority of teachers, if you have that gift and you're anointed to be a teacher, you have to have patience. You cannot be impatient and call yourself a good teacher. There are teachers that are out there and they're bad because they have no patience at all. They got other emotional issues or other things going on that is causing them or keeping them from being the best teacher they could be. So you always have to strive to be a good teacher. And the only way you can refine this gift of teaching, over time, you have to continue to refine it or you'll get burnt out, okay? And the way you do that is through faith and prayer. So always strive to be a good teacher. I believe, as a person who always used to teach, Bible study in the congregations that I used to attend to the younger generation, that no one, and goes for teaching when it comes to the Bible or anything else, math or anything else. I love math and I love teaching the younger generation about math. But no one is ignorant, unable to learn, or foolish when it comes to a teacher helping to empower someone that's young. Now, it may take time for some people to get a better understanding, for example, in the field of math. But no one is outside of learning. So teachers just have to have the patience. They have to have faith and prayer to see what is the key to unlock the way in which this particular student can learn the best. That's all you have to do. Now, with that being said, if you're a teacher and you find yourself getting burnt out, frustrated, or you got something else going on, you may have to temporarily sometimes step away in order to refresh your spirit, your ruach. And sometimes you may have to even step away permanently if Adonai has placed you on a different path. I'll give you another prime example from what I've experienced in the past. I was volunteering to teach as a member, as a part of a congregation that I attended for some years. And I taught the children that were 12 and younger, okay? And did that, helped and assisted and aided for 4 to 5 years, okay? And when it came to it, come to find out that the person who was over the kids' congregation, who I did my best to always help and be a help because I love teaching and teaching that younger generation. Come to find out this particular leader who was over the whole kids ministry had resigned over a year before, but I wasn't notified, okay? I thought that was strange, but I just brushed it off because, I still love teaching. So I confronted this particular individual because I had to, because this particular individual's husband came to me and asked me if I wanted to leave. But when I talked to that particular person and I saw their countenance, their demeanor change, I was like, God, I don't know what spirit that is, but that's an unhappy spirit, okay? So what I needed to do was go before the Most High God, and I went before him saying, maybe I did something to offend this person. Maybe something happened. So I had to go before the Lord with faith and prayer to find an answer. And so what God revealed to me is, look, the problem that's going on is an internal problem spiritually with this person that I'm trying to deal with. It's nothing regarding you. You're doing what's right. But this person has to deal with their issues. But until then, which I said to the Most High God, I'm trying to figure out, well, what path should I go? The choice is yours. Either you can stay up under this particular person and in this ministry and helping, being an aid, or I got something else that I need you to focus on. Because this particular person has no interest in the path that I need to place you on. And so what I did is I went before some of the leadership in that congregation a week later and presented a resignation, explaining to them that I had to step back from a whole horde of responsibilities I had taken on. And the reason why is because God was setting me on another path. Who knew that path would lead to Sajika Bible studies? Never saw that coming. But anywho, you have to have faith in prayer and go before the Most High to know for certain. Okay? There is enough of God to spread throughout the whole world. Nobody has a niche on one particular gift or the way in which they minister. It's enough of work out there for everybody. The laborers are few. God has said that centuries and centuries and centuries ago. It still remains the same today. So in being a teacher, you have to be cautious about your path, especially if you see yourself getting burnt out, or if you hear God's calling, you have to go before him to see exactly what he's having you to do. Because he made it clear the choice was mine, And I put that choice forth and laid it after he presented that to me. After I went and put my resignation, I had no regrets at all because God knew that I would not have no clue of the beautiful path that he would lay me on that's before me today. And I'm so grateful. Now let's move on to leadership. Now for leadership, I'm going to say that in leadership, you still have to rely on faith and prayer, because in order to be a good leader or servant, You have to trust in the Ruach of Elohim in order to guide God's people in the right direction. And in being a leader, it is so complicated when it comes to being over a lot of people, because you have one group feeling we should go this direction. This group feels we should go that direction. This group feels, and they're so heartfelt. But the ultimate decision resides on the leader and the leadership. And that leadership has to rely on the Ruach of Elohim and be guided by it. Okay? That means you have to make the hard decisions in order to go the direction that maybe half the population may not want to go or feel is wrong. But if you're granted this gift, you have to do that and be at peace with it. And the only way you can be at peace with it is that you trust in the Most High God, and He will direct your path. Think about Moshe during the Exodus. How much annoying and frustrating stuff he had to put up with from our ancestors, the children of Israel, saying that they wish they could go back to Egypt and be back in bondage instead of being out here in the wilderness and struggling. Oh man, that had to be hard. But he had to trust in the Most High God in order to be guided in the right direction. Look, he hit that rock and caused water to come out, and that was something that caused him to not be able to go into the promised land. And I know he regretted that decision, but he still was a faithful servant of the Most High God, who was responsible in leading the children of Israel out of captivity. And that's a hard responsibility. So leadership is very, very vital. I want to give you one more piece of advice when it comes to leadership. Leadership is not chaotic. Being a good leader means you're not mentally chaotic and sporadic. Leadership is organized and structured. I have seen people who have helped or been under leadership, under someone, and they're a servant to them. Multiple people. And a leader be over a group. And as soon as that leader has told the group, okay, I'm going to get such and such to decorate, or for instance, decorate the setting for this feast we're going to have, right? This person goes and they makes beautiful setting or whatever. Then the leader comes in and goes, I think we need to change all of that. That is not of God. That's chaos. God is not the author of confusion. If a leader is a good leader, they're not chaotic. They're not sporadic. They have focus. Okay? And that causes the people who are under the leadership to fall away when they see that a leader disregards and is chaotic and don't have structure. It's like they cannot fall under sound, peaceful standards in order which to provide a service. Okay? So good leadership is never chaotic. Okay? The enemy is coming in and causing confusion and using that leader to cause chaos. And so people have to understand a good leader has focus. Now, as far as service, being a servant, here is what's that I'm going to tell you based on what I've seen over the years in different ministries, and also seeing people be of servant when it comes to shelters, homeless, it comes to catering to congregations. Being a servant does not mean you are to subject yourself to mental and emotional abuse. Now, it's understood that also includes physical abuse, okay? But being a servant does not mean you subject yourself to emotional and mental abuse. That is not the path God would have you have. Now, if you find yourself in being a servant and someone comes at you in that manner, being mentally or spiritually, mentally, and emotionally abusive, you have to call them out on it and set them straight real quick. Doing a service does not subject you to abuse. And sometimes maybe that person doesn't realize that they're being hostile or hateful. And you have to check that. More than one person has to check that too. God is not the author of confusion. And it's not going to cause you, if you're doing a service, that works in union for the good of the Most High God, for it to be abusive at all. Never. No matter what congregation you're in, no matter what type of ministry that you're involved in or organization. Okay? Now, sometimes you may have to step away from a service that you've been partaking in for 1, 2, 3 years, sometimes just like with teachers, even leadership, to refresh your spirit. But you have to trust in with faith and prayer that God is guiding you to do so. But one thing I will say about this, about service, is sometimes you're going to find yourself, if you're trusting in the Most High God wholeheartedly, that you may be asked to take a totally different path from what you're used to of your 10 years, 4 years, 5 years, 20 years of service, especially when you seek to honor God more than man. When you honor God more than man. And some people, it's just a habit when you work and you're doing service and you're working with the same group of people, or you're working with the same staff, what have you. You have a connection that's like a brotherhood or a sisterhood. But if you're genuinely seeking to honor God more than man, and He calls you out of that, sometimes you may have to leave that line of service that you're used to. Look, body beside, it was kind of a little bit hard for me to break away from some things that I was used to being the same pattern as far as ministry goes for years, for decades. But when I honestly sought the Most High God and what He needed me to do, and He told me, you have to do this particular task. At the beginning, I was like, you ain't saying that for me. I got to pray again on that, Lord. I ain't ready for that. But when I humbled myself before Him, I knew, and I do not regret. I regret missing the people sometimes, because the path that God has placed me on, especially when it came to teaching actual descendants of Israel who they are based on history and the Word of God, it caused a lot of people, as far as my relationship with them, to fall by the wayside, because they felt like this was something abstract and abnormal, but it's not. When you're doing the will of the Most High God, it's going to cause you and pull you into an arena that is not pleasing to the majority of man. And when you're doing it to honor the Most High God and Him alone, you have nothing to worry about. Well, body and side, this is the end of part 2 of lesson 10. We're going to move on to the next few gifts. I think I'm going to cover about 3 or 4 in that one. So I hope this message was very enlightening for you and giving you a clear understanding of your path and your gifts. If God has imparted one of these gifts on you, listen, God's gift is not to be a burden to harm you, to cause you to fall apart, to cause you to be uneasy. It's for the glory of His kingdom. If He's called you to do that, you're going to have so much peace as long as you trust in Him and rely on faith and prayer to guide you by trusting in Him. So don't worry, don't fret. You'll find if God has imparted a gift from the Ruach of Elohim on you, and I've noticed this with some people, they will run and run and run and run from that gift because they're not ready. They're not ready to abide by God's standard yet. And they will run around in circles until they humble themselves completely before the Most High God, and everything falls into place. Trust me, I know. Well, body Messiah, like I always say, may Adonai Elohim cover and surround you and your family, shield and protect you, and envelop you in His shalom peace. Bye.